Welcome, everybody, to the White Noise Podcast. We help you become resilient and self-sufficient, and hopefully a bit state-proof as well while you're in the process. Please welcome tonight's guest, Che Gourmet. Welcome, Che.
Thanks, CJ. Happy to be here.
It's a bit overdue, and you're one of my favorite humans, especially when it comes to a lot of people might not know this, but I've got a bit of a hot sauce and fermentation fetish. And luckily, it served me well during the lockdown because I was able to whip up amazing ginger beers and good sauces and good resources while
And
everyone else.
I'm sure there was some pineapple beer in there as well.
Oh, for sure, honey. Anything that goes down well was fermented as such and turned into beer or some form of alcohol.
Most
So,
definitely.
Che, can you
Yes.
give us a quick introduction to my audience, who you are, what you do, and just a quick 101 of Che?
No problem. So, hi guys, my name is Che, and I am the owner of Che Gourmet. We are the largest fermented food business in South Africa, with kimchi being our, the most important product that we make. I traveled the world for 5 years, and while I was traveling, I took inspiration from all the families and the people that I met, and I brought all those ideas back to South Africa and turned it into a business. And that was about 6 years ago. Currently, we have the largest kimchi factory in South Africa, and we are the first commercial fermented food brand. So you'll find us in a few spas and a few of the health stores throughout the country.
Well, I'm so happy that you made it so far. Last time I spoke to you as well, I think Jackson spas and a lot of other places as well, and then smaller shops as well. And
Yes,
nationally,
yeah.
how are you doing? Do you have a kind of national presence right about now, or how are you doing?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, we were still very much Gauteng based. Just obviously transporting fermented food is not the easiest thing in the world. It's very temperature sensitive. So when I had a discussion with the buyers from Wellness Warehouse, I asked them if we could trial a few orders, and that was 2 years ago. And basically, since 2 years ago, we've been completely national. I got in my car 2 years ago with my cooler box and some price lists and introduced myself to all the health stores in Durban, all the way up to the North Coast as well. And a lot of those owners also gave us the opportunity to supply them. It was a very interesting market 2-3 years ago. People weren't really willing to give me the space because it's quite a risky product to put on the shelves. But yeah, so it's, people are finally understanding the purpose of fermented food, and they're willing to give me the space now to be in their stores, which is quite exciting.
It's safe to assume you put kimchi and a lot of fermented food on the map here in South Africa, right?
Most definitely. I started at markets about three years ago. My main purpose 3 years ago was all about education. Not
Right.
only what is kimchi, but what is fermented food, what is fermentation. And, luckily due to the rise of things like Netflix and people being more intrigued by what's happening internationally, a lot of people now finally, 6 years later, understand exactly what kimchi is, what sauerkraut is. I mean, sauerkraut's been a thing that we've had in South Africa for years, but it does come from Germany and it's all pasteurized. So it's been that break in education for me of, saying to people, this is what fermented food actually is. This is what it should look like. This is what it should taste like. So a lot of people now finally get that, and they are jumping onto the bandwagon, which is really exciting for brands like myself and all the other fermented brands in South Africa.
Well, I'm so happy that I've got the best person on. I've got the authority on my show. And
Most
if
definitely.
Netflix continues with the notion that they're going to push out more local content, they'll soon be Deadflix. So let's hope that does not come to pass, because I don't want
Yes, let's hope
SABC
not.
2.0.
No, let's not. Let's not hope for that at all.
For sure. Che, so, I mean, we're talking about ancient preservation techniques, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of them still being used. Can you give me some examples? And I think the ones that I might want to cover tonight is pickling, fermentation, dehydration, and sun drying. Just walk me through all of these, how they differ, what they're about, and that would be kind of my ask from you.
Cool. So basically, when it comes to food preservation, I mean, that's the purpose of all of these techniques, is to preserve and extend the shelf life of products, be it vegetables, fruits, or meat. So, I mean, 100 years ago, they were using salt to cure beef and fish and pork. They were using the sun to dry their vegetables because back then, you only had certain vegetables and fruit at certain times of the year. And in winter, obviously, you can't really grow anything. So they had to figure out, what are the methods that they could use to extend the shelf life of those products. So, I mean, sun drying, it's a very basic concept. You slice your vegetables nice and thin, you put them out in the sun and hope and pray it doesn't rain. Also wind drying as well is also something, so you use the wind. And there's a lot of places in Europe, they actually build these wind cellars where there's, it's like pallets, walls, and the wind actually blows through it. And it specifically near the coast, because then the salt air actually then cures the meat and the vegetables that they hang. Very similar to how we kind of do biltong, except we add salt to the biltong because we don't have, the coast in Joburg. Also, another
do you reckon?
technique,
sorry, Shay, to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Do you reckon I'm close enough to the ocean to try that?
I think you should. I don't know how much space you have on your balcony, but you could definitely give it a whirl.
And I also want to say, sorry, just to interrupt you again, like, you don't want to do that whole wind drying in the free state with all the dust, right? You probably want to be in a place where you don't. There we go. And it depends on what time of the year, because winter you don't have flies and your air is actually drier and less humid, which is actually better for that kind of drying, isn't it? So,
and that's why when you think about when people did their preservation, it was generally in winter, because that's when, there was no surplus and the weather was perfect. The temperature was, much lower than usual. But another technique that you actually didn't mention is smoking. Smoking was also like a very big technique back in the day. They would almost bury, they would dig these holes and they would hang their meat and their veggies in there and smoke it. And the smoke then obviously cured the meat and that extended its shelf life. So also another thing is burying things. Obviously in Korea, they bury their kimchi. They make kimchi once a year, generally in November. The huge festival is called Kimjang. Basically, what all the families do, they come together once a year and they make enough kimchi for the entire family. So obviously, that's a lot of kimchi. And where do you put it? So they would put it in these beautiful earthenware pots, and they would actually bury it in the ground. And then that burying obviously would then, it would keep the temperature nice and cool. It restricted any type of oxygen going into the pots, so it became a complete anaerobic fermentation, which is obviously what you need for food. Sugar as well is also a method of preservation. One of the biggest sugars that we use in the world is honey. And I mean, for those people that are aware of fermentation, preserving garlic in honey is actually a big thing. But you don't actually just use garlic. You can use ginger, you can use onions, you can actually sugar cure meat as well. So these ancient methods, they are ancient, but we kind of still are doing them if you think about it, but not obviously in the traditional sense.
Right. I think one thing that comes to mind when I think about this is one has to distinguish between the modern chemical preservation and then the ancient preservation techniques. I mean,
definitely.
So as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, right? And we'll have an episode about this because I'm fascinated about the steps and everything. You're starting a business, right? You make something and your friends come over and say, God, this is delicious. We love what you're making. And everyone wants it. Then you get an idea, I'm going to do a business about this. And then you have to go about setting out, right? And then you have to make decisions, right? And you have to ask yourself, and I think one of the questions you ask yourself very early on is like, what's the difference between modern chemical preservation and then ancient preservation techniques, and how it kind of affected the way you went forward? So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So when it comes to modern preservation, if I can even call it that, because it's, once again, it's understanding that the world, there's a lot more people, they require more food. So once again, they want to extend the shelf life without really understanding what is happening to the food. It's just, okay, cool, so there's food, but we don't care if it really necessarily nourishes you. It's just to fill your stomach. So the biggest, I would say, modern day preservation techniques is canning. About like 100 years, I think people have started doing canning. The problem with canning specifically is they heat the food to about 120 degrees Celsius to kill absolutely everything that could be present on the can, in the factory, on the vegetable. And there isn't enough research to tell us what the nutritional value is of those vegetables once they sit for 2 or 3 years. I mean, back in the day with the war, obviously canning food was the only way people could actually survive and have food, because they didn't have fridges or freezers, which is also one of the modern techniques of food preservation. We have fridges, we have freezers. Big companies, big vegetable companies, they blast freeze their vegetables, and that's just to kind of preserve the nutrients. So freezing is actually one of my most favorite food preservation techniques, next to fermenting, because nothing is added. It's just temperature. It's just blast frozen. The nutrients are kind of like locked in. So when you go to the shops and you buy your stuff and you bring it home, it still has the same nutritional value, which is pretty awesome. And then what's the other one I wanted to talk about? Pasteurization. So, when people are pasteurizing milk and pasteurizing food that's in glass jars, obviously canning is a very cost-effective means of preserving food, because also tins are recyclable, which is pretty cool, as well as glass. But pasteurization, once again, it's heating food to a certain point where the food is still, it's still got some nutritional value, but once again, it's not enough as it should be. And then two of the ones that I hate the most is irradiation. So irradiation is like taking your product and X-raying it 8,000 times and basically killing not only the bad, but also all of the good. And then also adding of preservatives and chemicals and things like that. These types of chemicals, they do have their place, if I can say that, in the food industry, but they have their place in certain things. And I understand that people have died from botulism and E. coli poisoning and mold growth and like all of those, the bad bacteria growth that has occurred on food. So they just, the food industry wanted to be like, okay, cool. We want to feed the world in the safest way for the longest period of time without really thinking about, okay, is this actually going to extend the life of the person that we're feeding, or is it just going to fill them for today?
So there was never any consideration about what's the trade-off if we have food on shelves for multiple years, or if we heat food to 120 degrees Celsius, what's the degradation in nutrition? What do we lose from that?
But also, if you think about the food industry as well, a big retailer doesn't want a product on their shelf that's going to explode or grow mold or leak or bubble. They want
or expire in 2 weeks, to be honest, as well.
So it's like a double-edged sword, where a retailer, they want the best for their customers. They want to give them access to variety, but they're restricted because they don't want to take that risk, because it's a financial risk as well as a potential health risk for their customers.
Right.
That's why people who want to supply big retailers have to jump through a million hoops to actually get that type of health certification, as I have explained to you many times.
And then other people come in the scene and they just don't do it, but they sell their products anyway.
Exactly.
That's a whole nother episode right there.
That's a whole other episode for
sure. So while we're on this, I think we were segueing nicely into it. Are all preservation techniques equal, Shay?
With the purpose of preserving vegetables, yes, but with the purpose of providing nutrition, no. They are not all equal at all.
Okay, would you mind elaborating on that a bit?
So when you consider, obviously, as I mentioned, canning, you are boiling something within an inch of its life. There's no nutritional value. There is some nutritional value, but it's not enough to provide you with the recommended daily allowance of what you need in a day. Pickling is the addition generally of sugar and vinegar. Sugar, as we already know, is not the best, it's very low pH. So the types of vinegars that they use to pickle traditionally is like white distilled vinegar. And if you can wash your floor with white distilled vinegar, why on earth are you going to consume it? So yeah, that's kind of like, when it comes to what is the nutritional content of a pickled vegetable, because it hasn't necessarily been heated to such a high degree, the nutritional value in there is quite high. When it comes to pasteurization, obviously, like I said, it's a high temperature. There's some nutrition there, but it is not the best. The irradiation, once again, kills the good and the bad. The addition of chemicals, I don't want to say that it's the chemicals that take the nutrition away from the food. It's just now you are consuming. Hi, JC.
Hey,
CJ and JC. I like that.
My legal homie here is a lawyer journalist thing. I still have to have a chat with him. But anyway, welcome, JC. Go on.
So it's not, so when you are adding, potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate to things to preserve its life, you are then actually consuming those chemicals. And has there been enough research done on what that does to the body? Sure, but it's not as in depth, and I don't really want to get into that. Yeah.
Right.
And then obviously the biggest thing we're talking about is fermentation. So fermentation, it's not just vegetables in a salt brine. Their nutritional value changes. The nutritional value actually gets higher during fermentation. So if you want to put them all on a scale, I mean, fermentation is just up there with being the most nutritious form of food preservation, because nothing is being removed, nothing is being added, it's being enhanced through a natural process.
Right. Maybe just give a quick overview of what fermentation is to the audience, Shay, just like how fermentation happens.
So when I talk about fermentation, I'm going to talk about food fermentation, not beverage fermentation. Obviously, I'm well versed in beverage fermentation, but obviously specialized in the food part.
I think all my audience members are well versed in fermentation, guys.
Yes,
it's whiskey, it's beer, it's brandy, it's wine, it's gin,
mead, it's all the good stuff.
It's everything without mead. Ooh, a good topic that for
mead
another
is very
time.
Nice. Mead is very nice. There's a fantastic company in South Africa. They are the first mead manufacturer in South Africa. Fantastic stuff. They make a mead beer, and then the first mead MCC in South Africa. It's pretty.
We need a name here. You can't keep us hanging like this.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Melure, Melarue, Melrue. I don't know, but it's that.
Melure.
I don't know.
Okay, cool.
So I was lucky enough to actually taste their products last year, and it is on par with some of the best MCCs in South Africa. My favorite MCC is from Krone to Jonge Gesallen, the farm in Tilbach, the best MCC in South Africa. It's amazing. So what we're
I love this elitist side of you. I love this elitist side of you. I just want to put it out there.
When you are a fermenter, you drink only the good stuff. That's for sure.
Then you ferment as a person on the next day, especially that morning, the first few hours.
Well, we ferment every single day. So I'm pretty much the story of my life.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So what were we going on about? We were talking about the nutritional value. So yeah, we'll go into more depth on that just now.
Yeah. So in other words, not all fermentation techniques are equal. There seems to be, for me, a clear winner here. It's fermentation. Yeah. It seems like
you asked me what is fermentation.
Right.
So as your listeners know, they know all about beverage fermentation, but let me just explain food fermentation to you. So basically, the process of fermenting food is creating an environment for vegetables and fruit. I'm just going to talk about vegetables here, that encourages the growth of good bacteria. That is generally brought on by the addition of salt. Salt is kind of the starter, as you would, to kind of start the process of fermentation. And during the fermentation process, there's good bacteria present on vegetables, and that bacteria basically is encouraged to multiply. Once the bacteria starts to multiply, the pH drops substantially. It can go all the way down to 1.8. At that pH, bad bacteria like E. coli, Listeria, things like that, they cannot survive. So that basically allows bacteria like Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus to multiply, and it kind of like takes over, and it takes over the entire process. So basically, also during the fermentation process, the bacteria, it actually pre-digests the vegetables. And by it doing that, it kind of breaks down the starches and the natural sugars. So when you consume something that is fermented, your body doesn't have to work so hard to break it down. So when people say, oh, I can't eat cabbage because, you know, I get bloated or my stomach hurts, it's because generally you are consuming a raw cabbage. So when you consume that raw cabbage, your body has to build up all those stomach acids to then break it down. But a fermented vegetable, be it a carrot or a cabbage, your body doesn't have to, you know, work so hard to break it down. So when you consume something fermented, you don't have any types of inflammation or bloating, which is obviously, you know, ideal for you. And when the products ferment as well, it increases the bioavailability of minerals and nutrients and vitamins as well. So when you actually ferment cabbage, you increase its vitamin C content by up to 80%. So, you know, that is just even more of a reason to consume fermented food, especially, you know, with the changing of the seasons and with COVID lying around. You know, we want to be consuming more natural vitamin C, and that is pretty much why fermented food should be on your plate every single day, because to go from like a 5% vitamin C content to an 80% vitamin C content just through the process of fermentation, you know, that's pretty incredible. So kind of like in a nutshell, it's controlled spoilage of food, if I can say that. You basically are you're making vegetables better for your body to break down. And by doing that, you are increasing the health of your gut and your microbiome, which is then looking after your organs, your brain, and your neurotransmitters. So it's quite a fascinating topic.
Oh, that's intriguing. That's a hell of a spike in nutritional value right there. So I'd say it's a win. So if you're looking to ferment one day, I think Shay and I will probably have a random good workshop where you make a few food items and have a wine or a beer or other fermented beverages
or
to
mead.
complement
We'll
that.
have a mead.
Let's be bourgeois. I mean, I love being elitist. For sure, Shay, for sure. Now, having said that, I'm a bit biased on this next question. When it comes to flavor, which techniques are best? I mean, let's be honest. You mentioned pickles earlier, and pickles don't always have to have sugar in it, right? You can decide to actually just go with vinegar, just depending on what your thing is.
Yeah.
So I found that some pickles are also very quite amazing. Then some dried, if I sometimes dehydrate or dry stuff, like it's also very flavorful. We had the discussion earlier where some peppers actually they are much stronger, they're more pungent, they're more flavorful. But there's one that stands out, and I've made a few of these, and Shay makes a living off this, and then it's fermentation. Because in a way, as Shay mentioned already, fermenting gives us a hint of like acidic flavor, but also kind of enhances all the other flavor in there, right? I mean, you can get very creative with what you add to it. So you can maybe talk us through what's your favorite flavor enhancing preservation method, and maybe what works better in some cases than others, what foods work better in some instances. So yeah, you can just talk us through
once
that.
Again, I'm very biased here. Fermented food is obviously my favorite flavor profile. I've become so used to the sour, pungent flavor of a ferment. It also enhances with my fermented jalapenos, they are a hell of a lot hotter than pickled jalapenos, because the fermentation process kind of, you know, it escalates the flavor profile, which is why a lot of commercially bought hot sauces are fermented. The only problem is they add vinegar to it at the end, so then it kills all the good stuff.
Vinegar, xanthan gum, and even sometimes some preservatives on top of that. I'm like, you don't have to do it if the pH level is low enough, guys.
Exactly. I think people get scared with fermentation because they're scared of, like we spoke about, exploding bottles or mold growth, and obviously adding acid to that completely prevents it. Well, if you add the correct amount. But I think as South Africans, we're very used to the pickled flavor. I mean, think about beetroot. gherkins, pickled onions. Those are very familiar flavors. I think all South Africans have had. So when you try and say to someone, okay, cool, well, the pickled gherkins are great, but the fermented ones, they are different and they're better for you. So try and, taste one or try one. I see it at a lot of my markets. People are very intrigued by fermented stuff, especially because I don't just ferment cabbage. I ferment everything. So people are very intrigued to be like, okay, cool. So this is a fermented carrot. This is what a fermented jalapeno tastes like. Fermented onions, fermented salsa, all of that. So I think in the last year, or I would say the last 2 years, South Africans in general are becoming a little bit more adventurous with their palates. So, there's a lot of Asian restaurants popping up all over the place, and that's generally a sour, salty kind of a taste as opposed to a sweet pickle. So basically for me, I think the fermented flavor is my absolute favorite. And then to compare to a pickle, I love pickled gherkins. I love pickled onions. I love my mom's pickled beetroots. So obviously fermentation is number one, but underneath that, pickling is obviously a great flavor profile for me.
Right. And and then you can get it creative, right? I mean, when you're pickling, it doesn't always have to be raw ingredients. The rule of thumb in my mind, and you can help me out here, usually 50-50. So if I want to grill 50% and keep 50% fresh, or I want to smoke 50% and keep 50% fresh, the reason why you want to keep 50% fresh is you still want that lactobacillic, not lactobacillic acid, the microorganisms. What are they called? Yes.
You
want to keep them. Oh, is it the lactobacillus? Okay, cool. You want to keep the lactobacillus alive because they are actually responsible for the fermentation. They react with the salt brine that you create, and then they start to ferment. But then you can get real rich flavor profiles. And what Che does as well, and you actually taught me this, is actually before you actually make any food, but especially in these, like pan fry your herbs. Like take your coriander, your cumin, your star anise or whatever you're adding to the mix, and just pan fry them, and
seeds, your caraway seeds,
smell that shit in your kitchen, man. Cook it up.
Definitely.
Is it how long do you do that for, Che? Like, honest question, like when you start smelling it?
10 seconds. As soon as you brown a herb, you've kind of stuffed it up. You the whole purpose of heating it is just to extract the natural oils, and what you're smelling is actually the natural oils coming out of that whole spice. So, I mean, you don't want to be stirring your pan for like 2 minutes because you basically are wasting your time. But I would say maybe like 10 to 20 seconds and then you're done. And then you're done. And then obviously you can grind it. You can just like hit it a little bit so that you kind of break the seed open just to release even more of the flavor.
So more time pestle, like clap it down a bit.
And don't really clap it into a powder. Fermenting with the powder, not so tasty. So just gotta be mindful of that. Whole spices are generally better.
Okay, so just kind of keep it whole and maybe just boost them a bit.
Just break it up a little bit and then add it.
See, this is why we've got sages like you on the show, right?
Apparently.
So Che, so we've talked about like kind of you mentioned a few foods that you're pickling that you love and everything. From a pickling and fermentation perspective, what's the no-go zones there? Like, what should we not be pickling and what should we not be fermenting? If anything, like, just give us a bit of a guide. What doesn't work as well as we think it would?
So you can pretty much pickle or ferment anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should. If I can just give you that advice. So you can ferment anything. You can ferment meat, eggs, vegetables. Oh, no gherkins for you.
JC McFarlane is.
Why, JC? Do you prefer sauerkraut?
Yeah, what did the gherkins ever do to you? Tell us in the comment section.
What about fermented gherkins? So much better. But
sorry, Che, for that.
No, but when it, like I said, just because it is grown in the ground doesn't mean you should ferment it. Also, something very important is if you are not well versed on fermentation, you haven't kind of done the basics. You've fermented a cabbage, you've been quite successful at that, made a hot sauce, maybe done some carrots or cauliflower. don't be throwing meat into a salt brine and think you're going to be like this massive fermenter like in a week. It can become very toxic and it can become rancid. So you have to be very careful with your quantities and the types of things that you are fermenting. Something I've recently started fermenting, which I love, is potatoes. So you ferment them for about 4 days. You can cut them into wedges and put them in a 3% salt brine for about 4 or 5 days. And during the fermentation process, obviously the bacteria is consuming all the starches. So technically, if you think about it, the potato becomes low carb, which, I don't want to tell all the people on keto because then they'll be eating potatoes. But it doesn't obviously reduce it, so it's completely low carb. There's a lot of testing that has to be done on a fermented potato, but the flavor of it is insane. So obviously you don't eat it raw. Once it's fermented, then you cook it. Once again, you're not consuming the potato for the probiotic benefit, but you are eating it because the bacteria has pre-digested the starch and the sugars. So technically that potato becomes more nutritious for your body.
Right. So in a nutshell, the moment when you ferment something and you put it into an oven and you heat it to a certain temperature, you kill all the probiotics, because the one benefit of fermented food is you get those probiotics, but the moment you put it in the oven, you forfeit. Yeah, you're forfeiting those. Yeah, which is fine. I mean,
it is fine. It is completely fine because, as I mentioned, when the food has been fermented, it's been pre-digested, so the actual nutritional value of it has increased. So if you look at it like that and you remove the probiotics out of it, you're still consuming a highly nutritious vegetable or fruit or whatever it is that you are fermenting.
Right.
So it's not all bad.
No, for sure. And then another question that I wanted to ask, and we're actually going back to a previous one that you kind of touched on, is like, do we lose nutritional value in some preservation methods?
Yes, you do. Once again, there hasn't been enough research done on opening up a canned food after 15 years and testing the nutritional value, because they just kind of assume that it's okay. But I would say that everything but fermentation does not have much of a nutritional value. There's definitely still nutritional value there, but it obviously isn't as much as comparing it to fermentation.
Right. What's we don't have to go very scientific here, but what would you say is the main reason for that? Why do we? I know, like with effectively, if we dehydrate or we pickle, we basically lose all the living things on that, right? So if you pickle,
yes. So
acidity level.
I'm not including dry. I'm not including drying in this. Drying actually and freezing, once again, that is locking in nutrition.
So that's great. I didn't know that. Sorry.
Once the food has been defrosted, so you have these pea farmers and they blast freeze their beautiful peas. You come home, you boil it in a pot, and there we go. You've got some good nutrition. When you dehydrate something, you also lock in an element of nutrition there. So you extend the shelf life of the vegetable, and when you rehydrate it, there is nutrition still available in that product.
Okay, well, that actually makes a bit of sense. And then just for people again, like when you do pickle, you actually there's two ways to pickle, isn't there? You can either use a hot brine or a cold brine pickle, and yes, the hot one you actually have a pot. You can correct me here: 50% water, 50% vinegar, and then you add all the spices and herbs, and you just cook it. And then you actually pour it over your vegetables that's already in a mason jar. Or, as we mentioned earlier, you can just have that mixture sitting overnight, probably to take in all that flavor, and then the next day do a cold kind of pickle method as also, well. Or just or just put in the herbs and stuff in each jar individually, because that will also lock in the flavor. Then the pickles, just for my own reference and curiosity, how long do you let a pickle sit for it to kind of be optimal for tasting, so it really gets that tangy smell? Is it relatively instant?
It depends if you're hot pickling or cold pickling. Hot pickle, you're looking at 48 hours. But obviously, the longer it sits, the more intense it's going to be. Even if you hot pickle or cold pickle, same thing. I mean, I know people who have pickled onions in their fridges that have been there for 3 years. And, like it's obviously a lot more intense. So the longer you leave it, the better. When it comes to cold pickle, you're looking at least 2 weeks.
Right.
At least
Right.
2 weeks to actually, for the flavor of the pickling liquid to kind of, infuse within the vegetable itself. A hot pickle, it's pretty instant, if I can say that. Also, the purpose of a hot pickle is to create a vacuum seal when you close that lid, because then you can take that pickle and put it on the shelf in your pantry and just leave it there, because now there's no space between the top of your liquid and the lid. It's kind of become one, if I can say that. There's a vacuum seal in there. So something that is cold pickled won't have it won't have such a long shelf life, whereas a hot pickle generally will have a longer shelf life.
Right. Well, one thing I've been doing recently, and we're talking about vacuum seals and all these fun things, is actually taking tomatoes, buying a lot of tomatoes, cutting them into cubes or putting them in a food processor, depending on how you want to go about it. Cooking it in a bigger spot, having a few mason jars available. And then afterwards, what I do is I pour that tomato into the jar. I'll take a few fresh basil leaves, a bit of garlic. Because garlic, you don't want to put in while it's cooking, right? Because the flavor goes out. You actually want to put it in the jar, that last part, and like seal that in. And then you also add a pinch of salt. So you kind of at the end throw everything into the jar. Like I pour it halfway and then I move it all in. And then I seal it, right? Because you're right, because you don't want that. You want it up to the very top, and then you seal it. And it's a vacuum seal. So I actually have some of those in my hallway, and I've been opening.
Well, why don't you bring one to show everyone?
Ja, hou toch so aan.
Everyone wants to see your fermented tomatoes.
Well, let's play this game. It's gonna be
fun. Hope they don't explode.
So this is one I did very recently. I actually added a bit of pineapple for sweetness. So this is the tomato one with the basil leaf in it. So I added pineapple for a bit of sweetness, garlic, and then fresh basil leaves, and I cooked the tomato down. So this is in my hallway. Nice thing about canning, you don't have to put it in the fridge, right? You leave it in your pantry or anywhere that you store it.
Exactly.
Then here's a beautiful one. This one has been fermenting for more than a year. It's a jalapeno, a habanero hot sauce. That, as you can see, I've got the brine in there, and then all the ingredients. I chop them up in a nice chunky way. So what will happen with this, and I'm making a video on this one, where I'm going to process it. Basically, I'm going to pour all the brine out into another bowl, and then I'm putting it in the blender, and then I'm blending it. And then I'm going to slowly add the brine back until it's in the consistency that I want it, right? Yeah. But if I want it in a kind of more coarse texture, I can also throw it into a food blender or just slowly kind of process it in my blender. But it's all according to taste, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And then here's one that I used jalapenos, cumin, also a bit of, I think, pepper, star anise, and I fermented jalapenos. So I put it all in a fruit blender. So that's going to become small 150 ml jalapeno hot sauces. So probably give for friends for their birthdays and sell a few. So I always have this thing where I'm just trying to kind of sell enough to fund my hobby. But now with the vertical growing that I'm trying to attempt to do is actually grow a lot of exotic stuff that you don't get locally, and then make chili sauces out of that. So
that's awesome.
Stay tuned for that.
You'll have quite a lot of veg to work through. So
yeah, no, for sure. And the great thing is you're cultivating something that you don't get in the local market, right? So you and I go for taste and flavor. Yeah. So I never want to be like mainstream like you, because I don't want to jump through all the loopholes and everything. But
I don't think I'll ever have to stop doing that.
yeah. But I want to like produce enough to get by and keep investing in better equipment. So when I do decide I want to process, I don't also just want to sell fresh produce right off the bat, because if I just process it a bit, I can make 3 to 5 times, usually 5 times more on it. So it makes sense for me to make sauces and stuff, but I'm not going to produce it. I'm not going to process it all, right? So so the idea is to keep that fine balance. So then I'm going to ask the next question, Shay, and I think we've kind of answered this one, but if you want to go in a bit more detail, do some preservation methods increase or alter? Like, I think we touched on it, but if you want to actually go a bit deeper in that.
I think I did go quite deep into, you know, specifically fermentation, how it increases the nutritional value. Drying obviously doesn't increase nutritional value; it just kind of locks it in.
Locks it in.
Canning and pasteurization, sure, it locks it in to a certain extent, but it doesn't sustain it for long enough. And then what are the other ones? Salting, curing. I mean, all of those. It's just locking in nutrition, whereas fermentation is enhancing it.
Right. I mean, even the Scandinavian countries, right? It's not just vegetables. They're doing a lot of herring they fermented in.
No, definitely. I mean, herring on bread or herring on crackers? That's like a very famous
it's a
snack
delicacy
to have while you're there. I mean, it's incredible, but it's it's a bit weird for me to think of that. But when I go there, I definitely want to eat that because it sounds amazing. Like, why not? But it's just, there's so many different, it's the same process, but just using what is available to you in your country, which is, I mean, in South Africa, we have bokkums. That is salt curing fish. I mean, we've been preserving fish naturally for hundreds of years in this country. So, I mean, Africa is one of the obviously biggest continent, the biggest continent. No, is it Africa the biggest continent? No, Asia is. Never mind. But we've been preserving things for many years, specifically when it comes to salt. I mean, we have the Kalahari up the road, so people are using that salt to cure their meats when they were hunting and, to preserve their vegetables, make their beers and things like that. So it's existed in the world for so long. People just give it different names. They are fermenting different things or pickling different things. I mean, in South Africa, we're not going to go and start fermenting fish and selling it to Pick and Pay. Like it's just not. It's not in our culture to do that. Whereas in Europe, fish is quite a big deal.
Fair enough. And JC can't get some things in his mouth. Gurkhas in this case. But he loves bokkums, so I think JC has redeemed himself. He's fussy about the gherkins, but he'll take bokkums any day. So thanks, JC. Awesome. You've been redeemed.
That's awesome.
So Shay, I think we're going to start winding down, but let's maybe talk about some interesting recent fermentation. Let's call them trends. The sour bread movement comes to mind, and you've been seeing a lot of sourdough bread kind of popping up everywhere. That's kind of new and different. Maybe just talk about a few of your favorite ones and elaborate maybe on that and the different things you're seeing happening in the market, and what do you think the market is doing from a fermentation perspective, and what other ancient preservation techniques are coming back in full swing in different ways.
So, I mean, obviously, fermentation in South Africa has existed for a very long time. We have some of the best wine in the world, which is obviously fermented. What I'm starting to see of a lot now, the kombucha exploding in South Africa. There are so many different kombucha companies, popping up left, right, and center. Sourdough was probably one of my most favorite things that has, come to a head this year. I actually, during lockdown, my friend and I each made starters at the same time and baked our first loaf of bread together, but in separate homes, because obviously we weren't allowed to see each other. And it was quite an amazing kind of journey and experience to go through, like waking up in the morning and be like, oh, how's your starter doing today? And, what time are you going to feed it? And, it became like our little pet during lockdown.
It's the primitive version of a Tamagotchi that actually gives you something back.
Yeah, no, it was such fun. And then a lot of the bakers who have been making sourdough for years in South Africa, they finally had a platform. They finally had like an opportunity to also once again educate and and give people the skills to be like, you want to make sourdough? No problem. This is how you do it. But if you stuff it up, don't worry, you can buy the bread from me. It's all good. So it was a wonderful educational time during lockdown for people. I mean, people were fermenting pineapple beer, ginger beer. I think fermentation was the biggest thing to come out of lockdown because, you know, especially in South Africa with the booze ban. So
yes, I saw like just to add to that, Shay, sorry to interrupt you, but like the beer kits, you couldn't get any. Like beer kits were like
the gin
yeast
kits, the rum kits. It was all
you didn't
gone.
get the yeast, you didn't get the winemaking kits. It just exploded. And I'm happy for that, by the way. I like it that individuals are actually making their own stuff.
It is awesome that people they're willing to, you know, what I do is a very high risk thing, you know, trying to bring a living product into a shop and have the, you know, the retailer be like, okay, fine, we'll see how it goes. And now for a customer to go into the store and be like, oh, yay, there's fermented food here. You know, it's created the space now for fermenters where we're not so weird anymore, if I can say. We're not so unique. We're not like in the corner anymore. We are now being embraced in the industry, which is awesome. And by the country, actually, because people want to learn more. They want to ferment at home, be it bread, beer, or kimchi. So yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Right. So for many reasons, COVID has been quite a catalyst for fermentation in general. So I see a lot of people also got very creative by hosting a lot of workshops online, and people joined. You pay a fee, and you had a new way of interacting with people. And I also want to use 1 or 2 Saturdays a month, go to people that do exceptional things, and like just make something nice with them and interact with an audience too, where we just go and we just say, okay, cool, have these ingredients ready. Today we're going to do this. And then if you want to tune in and you just make it fun and interactive, and you hang out and you get to know the person and also what they're doing.
People were forced into the online sphere during lockdown because it was the only escape. It was the only escape that we had. So a lot of people embraced that opportunity to understand, learn, Zoom, Teams, whatever these, you know, things are. I did my first live kimchi demo on StreamYard actually a few months ago, and it was quite intriguing to actually interact with my own customers via my laptop screen, which was quite weird. But it was amazing that people actually wanted to tune in and listen and learn. It was quite amazing.
Yeah, I think we'll be seeing more from that moving forward. I think it's opened up the gate for people to actually I mean, think about this, right? If you have to drive out to do a workshop and you get there, you have a few drinks, and like now have to either Uber home or what. It's like, cool, now you can drink your own booze. You can still hang out. You can have a very jolly evening. You bring a few friends over. You all do it. And you make a bit of it's a hybrid event, right? Because I actually have people with me physically, depending on how you are. You can either be alone forever or you can have some friends over and do this event. But it's still social. And you get to learn and you get to do stuff where usually you'd have to drive into a place. There's limited seats available. And maybe you have to wait 6 or 3 or 2 weeks for it to actually, before they can accommodate you. Now it's like, cool, I can go in now and I can have the workshop, no problem.
And as someone that would host a workshop like that, it becomes very expensive because there's venue, there's ingredients, there's coffee, teas, snacks, food that you have to supply the people that are attending your workshop. So the online space kind of makes it a bit easier. You can get people to sign up, pay a small fee. People who couldn't afford it before can afford it now. So it's definitely made it a lot easier to educate people on things like how to make kimchi, how to ferment food, how to make sourdough, how to make kombucha, how to make kefir. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think a lot of people will be taking advantage of that. I mean, I recently held on a non-related note, I had a AGM that I actually hosted online because also it was like logistically just a nightmare. So we decided to actually host it online, and I'm thinking, wow, I'll charge buildings $450 a month for a year, and then they can have a few of those, and I can make an annual income from this. So why not? And it's so easy. So you can get very creative with this. So Shay, I think we'll be winding down now.
Cool.
Tell us a bit more about, are you running any promotions for the festive season? I know you gave me a code. I'm going to post it now. It will
Yes.
also be on the show notes. So if you enter
Yes.
this on checkout, I also added your URL at the end of the show. Bit of
Awesome.
punting for you for saying thank you for coming on to the
Lovely.
show.
Thank you for supporting small business.
Yes.
But
I'm
yeah,
very
so we
passionate
are
about small business.
We are offering all the listeners of the White Noise podcast 10% discount on your entire basket when you order off of the Che Gourmet website. Just pop in WN10 into the coupon code when you check out, and it'll automatically take off the discount. And we ship nationwide. So if you're in Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, Uppington, wherever you are, we can ship to you. So yeah.
Even Uppington.
Even Uppington. I recently sent an order off to Kareedu. Wherever that is, I don't know, but we sent the parcel there, and the customer was very happy. So.
But do you ship to the East Rand? That's the weirder question.
I do actually. Sometimes I deliver in person.
And you haven't been boxed while you deliver to the East Rand?
No, not yet.
Dangerous place, that shape. Check your back and always have a pepper spray at hand there, right?
Most definitely.
Okay, Shay, final words from you in closing. Like anything you wanna.
You know what? I just love sharing the concept of fermentation. Why people should be doing more of it. Why people should be exposing themselves to the process of fermentation. Understanding that there are businesses out there that are, embracing this opportunity, and we are trying to change the food landscape in the retail space with what we do. I mean, in America and Australia, they have these products available. We don't yet. So by supporting small businesses like me and the other manufacturers, you are helping us literally create an entire new section in a commercial retail store. And that's a very big deal for this country. It's boosting our economy, especially through COVID. It's creating jobs. It's supporting people and their families. So it's just wonderful to be given an opportunity to talk about what I love to do. So thank you very much.
Also, I'll definitely have you back. I have to send you an old one that has to be sanitized for various reasons.
Very much so. Very much so. Lots of editing on that one.
I'll send it through to you after you are happy with the end product. We'll probably release that one. We actually talked about ancient, again, like the history of canning. We went in more historically. We went in to how the industrialization of our food system, basically.
Yes.
And I think it was a very good chat, except for my few naughty comments that I will filter out.
Gonna have to cut those out.
Yes,
does anyone have any questions for me about anything that I've spoken about?
We don't have a lot of live viewers. I will give them a minute so they can ask if they have any questions, and
they
then
can also ask at a later stage as well.
Right, you guys are more than welcome to post the comments in the comment section. Shay will keep an eye out. I'll forward them to her, and she can just send me a reply, and I'll reply to it accordingly. Shay, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll have more of these, so you'll be my local food expert.
Fabulous.
By the way, I have a mycologist, a mushroom expert, I think, on next week if everything falls in my favor. So we'll be talking about the local mushroom industry. I'm quite intrigued, not just from the edible side, the medical mushrooms, and also obviously the psychedelic ones. So it's going to be quite an interesting.
I will definitely be tuning in for that one.
Come tune me in any day. Everybody, have a good evening. Shay, thanks for tuning in. Stay on the line. I'll meet you on the back end of the studio. Cheers, everybody. Have an awesome evening.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.